Right left, it's on the bar. Sir, there's too much fire. Light them, you idiot. Up top. Get up there.
Dank ferret.
Watch your language, this is a Disney Plus show, but seriously, dank ferric. So much went down in The Mandalorian Chapter 14, The Tragedy. Directed by Robert Rodriguez of Desperado, Sin City, and Spy Kids fame, this episode has Mando finally getting to Tython right away, without any detours, but nothing is ever quite so easy. New allies, old enemies, and don't forget those factory-fresh Dark Troopers are still out there somewhere, as well as Boba Fett, whose armor Mando is still lugging around. Will Djarin and Grogu make it out of this episode unscathed? Plus, what Jedi are still out there in the galaxy to train Grogu anyway? We'll break that down in a second, but of course, before we get into all of that, we have to warn you, the Razor Crest is hurtling straight for spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen this episode of The Mandalorian just yet, cover your ears because we're taking the next stretch with the windows down.
I want my armor back.
Okay, now that we're past the spoiler warning, Boba Fett has returned and totally redeemed himself! Now, as many of you know, I'm a huge Boba Fett fan and collector, and I've always known that Boba Fett is awesome, so this isn't too much of a surprise to me, but Jesse Gill, who writes and produces this fine IGN program, has built his entire career on bad-mouthing Boba Fett, saying that his biggest accomplishment in the Star Wars films was finding a spaceship in the garbage. After this episode, Jesse would like to retract these statements and urges anyone who gave Boba Fett a hard time to do the same. Portrayed by Temuera Morrison, Boba Fett is back, and for the first time, he's actually the deadliest bounty hunter in the galaxy. But let's back up a second and explain how we got there. In The Tragedy, Mando and the child make it to Tython with no side mission in between, for once, and once there, Grogu sits on a rock and broadcasts some glowing blue Force vibes to whatever Jedi are still out there and paying attention and listening, or whatever it is Jedi do. We'll go over some possible theories in a minute for that, but no time right now because the second that Grogu starts his light show, a ship shows up. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that's a heavily modified Coat Systems Fire Spray 31 class patrol and attack ship, better known as Slave One, Boba Fett's ship, and Jango Fett's before him. So is Boba Fett back?
Yep.
Yup, indeed, and he is not alone. Ming-Na Wen returns as mercenary Fennec Shand from Season 1, now serving a life debt to Boba after he saved her in the Tatooine desert and gave her machine abs, apparently. Boba Fett makes it clear what he wants right off the bat.
The armor was my father's. Now it's mine.
But before they get too deep into it, the Empire shows up and Boba Fett unleashes a rage honed in the belly of a Sarlacc pit and takes out an entire squad by himself, which is the sort of cool stuff that dorks like me have always known that Boba Fett was capable of because we read a bunch of paperback novels and Dark Horse comics way back in 1997. Anyway, Mando, Boba, and Shand hold off the troopers until Grogu can finish broadcasting his Force presence into the galaxy, which doesn't really seem secure, but whatever. But of course, Mof Gideon and the Empire track the Razor Crest to Tython, and they proceed to nuke it from orbit so thoroughly that we're probably never getting another weird filler episode where it gets repaired by Amy Sedaris' pit droids or by Mon Calamari fishermen. Anyway, a squad of Dark Troopers swoop in and they grab Grogu before Mando can because Boba Fett made him take off his jetpack earlier, and they take him to Moff Gideon's cruiser and make the jump to hyperspace. On a lighter note, Boba Fett convinces Mando the armor belongs to a Fett because he wrote his name and phone number on it with a hologram marker 25 years ago or whatever, and Mando lets him keep it. In return, Boba Fett and Fennec Shand tell Mando they are in his debt and will help him retrieve the child. Mando goes back to Sheriff Cara Dune for help. He wants to spring the criminal Mayfield, aka the first Star Wars character with a canonical Boston accent, to help him track down Gideon's cruiser. Speaking of Gideon's cruiser, we see that Grogu is on board, scared out of his mind, and using the Force to bash stormtroopers together like action figures in a sandbox. Moff Gideon reminds us that he's a mean villain by brandishing the Darksaber at an infant and then ordering him put into handcuffs, and then he acts creepily excited about his weird science project thing.
When we come out of hyperspace, send an encrypted message to Dr. Pershing. Let him know we have got our donor.
So yes, clearly the big important cliffhanger and titular tragedy of this episode is that Grogu is in the hands of the Empire, but there were some other juicy tidbits to chew on as well.
I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe.
Despite the claims of Mandalorian Prime Minister Almec that Jango Fett was just a common bounty hunter, Boba Fett gives us the backstory on Jango that the prequels never did. Imagine that. Jango was a foundling and fought in the Mandalorian Civil Wars, which is good enough for Mando, and he gives Boba Fett his iconic armor back because that seems legit. For Boba Fett fans, this episode seems directly geared toward redeeming Boba Fett as a character after 40 years of getting dunked on after his biggest moment involved getting knocked into a hole by a blind guy with a stick. The key takeaway is Boba may be a clone, but he was a clone of a real Mandalorian, meaning that all the clones were Mando clones, and despite their early miscommunication about the trade for the Mandalorian armor, Boba Fett and Fennec Shand are now allies, and seeing how Boba Fett handled himself, Mando could use the help. Now, assuming Mando and the gang are able to track Gideon down and rescue the kid, there could be another Jedi in the mix very soon. The Seeing Stone on Tython launched Grogu's Force presence into the galaxy, and per Ahsoka Tano's theory, if there's a Jedi out there to sense it, that Jedi would seek out Grogu. Said unnamed Force wielder could also be a wild card in the effort of getting Grogu back. Now, because Star Wars is a fantasy story spread across an entire fictional galaxy, the Jedi could be truly anyone. But who the hell wants to see some new character when it could be live-action grown-up Ezra Bridger from Rebels, or a Luke Skywalker played by Sebastian Stan since he looks like a young Mark Hamill, or even an old grizzled Mace Windu? I mean, really, falling into a hole wasn't a good enough end for Boba Fett. You really think a normal fall off a building was a fitting end for Mace pushed out of a Windu?
I don't think so.
Now, this was a short episode that was heavy on action and pretty light on Easter eggs this time around. Obviously, the moment that Slave 1 showed up, everyone was like,
"Here I come."
Boba Fett wasn't the only iconic thing that got some action in this episode. That club he was smashing stormtrooper helmets with is a gaffy stick, usually wielded by Tusken Raiders, but rarely with quite so much finesse. But here's some gaffy stick trivia for you. They were heavily inspired by a real-life Earthling weapon used by Fijian warriors called a Totokia, or beaked battle hammer, so it might not be a total coincidence to see Tamora Morrison wielding one so epically, given that he's from the neighboring island of New Zealand and is of Maori descent. Or maybe somebody was just like, wouldn't it be cool if Boba Fett had a gaffy stick? In any case, the Dark Troopers got referred to by name and we got to see them in action by kidnapping a sleeping baby, which is kind of anticlimactic, but I think we're probably going to see them square off against Mando soon enough. But what do you think? Who is the Jedi on the other end of Grogu's connection, and has Boba Fett been fully redeemed by this episode? Let's talk about it in the comments. Anyway, thanks for watching, and for more Mando, check out our breakdown on the Jedi's secret mission from last episode, and be sure to follow and subscribe to IGN wherever you like to watch. We'll see you next week.